We call it living. But if we look closely, most of what we do each day is quietly arguing with life. When someone we love leaves, whether they walk away or whether death takes them, we don't simply grieve. We bargain with reality. We say to ourselves, this should not have happened. This is not how it was supposed to be. And when a plan we cared about falls apart, we don't just feel disappointed. We feel betrayed, as if life owed us something and failed to deliver. But maybe life never promised us anything. Maybe we wrote the contract ourselves in our own minds, with our own expectations, and then held life accountable for something it never agreed to. Almost everything we call suffering has this same shape. There is what is actually happening, and then there is the story we tell ourselves about what is happening. The gap between those two things is where most of our pain lies. Not the clean pain of loss, but the lingering kind. The kind that follows us from year to year. The kind we carry so naturally that we forget it is even there, until one day we pause long enough to notice how heavy we have become. Over 2,600 years ago, a man looked at this pattern and asked a question we still haven't fully answered. Not, how do I get more? Not, how do I arrange my life so nothing goes wrong? But why is it that a human being can have everything and still not be at peace? Before he became known as the Buddha, he was Siddhartha Gautama, a prince, wealth, family, comfort. Everything the world tells us should be enough, and yet none of it resolved the fundamental problem, because the problem was never about what he had or didn't have. It was about how the mind relates to experience, the persistent way it refuses to let things be what they are. That question, why can't we be at peace with what is, lives underneath every restless night, every anxious morning, every moment we have looked at our lives and felt quietly that something is missing. And no amount of rearranging the outside ever settles it for long. We solve one problem, and the next one is already forming. We get what we wanted, and within weeks the wanting has shifted to something else. The target keeps moving because the target was never really outside us. The answer that came from that inquiry did not begin with changing the world. It began with seeing it clearly. In teachings preserved in the Pali Canon, the word acceptance doesn't appear the way we use it today. What appears instead is something more precise. Why a th a macron b hu macron t a letter 1e43 and tilde a macron letter 1e47 a d a ss a n a seeing and knowing things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be, not as we fear them to be, but as they are right now in this moment. This sounds simple. It is not. It asks us to look directly at what is happening without layering a story on top of it, without running from it or clinging to it, just seeing. And what does that kind of seeing reveal? When there is pain, we know there is pain. When there is joy, we know there is joy. When there is loss, we know there is loss. We don't ask, why me? We don't insist this must last forever. We meet the moment as it is. And this brings us to perhaps the most important distinction in the entire teaching. One that, once it settles in, quietly changes how we experience everything. Pain and suffering are not the same thing. Pain is part of being alive. The body gets sick. People we love die. Things we built come apart. This is not a flaw in life. It is life. In these teachings, this is the first noble truth, dukkha. The friction that comes from being a changing being in a changing world. But suffering, the deep, prolonged kind that weighs on us, that is something we add. The body gets sick and then the mind says, why me? What if this never gets better? Someone leaves and then the mind says, if only I had done it differently, if only I could go back. That entire layer, the why me, the if only, the this shouldn't be happening, is not the pain itself. It is the mind's response to the pain. And it is that response more than the original event that stays with us, for months, for years, sometimes for a lifetime. If we watch carefully, we can sometimes catch the moment it begins. A brief gap between the event and the story. A fraction of a second before the mind rushes in to explain, to judge, to resist. The event is one thing. What the mind does with it is something else entirely. And it is in that gap, that small, almost invisible space, where a different relationship with life becomes possible. In the teaching on dependent origination, this pattern is traced to a key movement in the mind, upadana, clinging. We cling to pleasant experiences, wanting them to stay. We cling to the belief that painful things should not exist. We cling to an image of how life is supposed to look. And it is this clinging, not life itself, that generates lasting suffering. So when we speak of accepting life as it is, we are not saying, be okay with everything. We are not saying, stop caring, stop feeling, stop responding. We are pointing to something more specific. Notice when you are adding a second layer of pain to the first one. Notice when you are fighting with what has already happened. And as best you can, let this moment be what it is. Even when it is not what you wanted, the pain of loss is natural. The pain of this should not have happened is something we create. And the entire path described in these teachings is, in a sense, an invitation to stop creating that unnecessary layer, not by shutting down, but by seeing more clearly, by learning to be with what is here, rather than living in the distance between what is and what we wish it were. There is a fear that most of us carry when we first hear the word acceptance. It sounds like giving up. It sounds like letting life walk over us, and no one wants that. So it is worth looking at what acceptance is not. Acceptance is not passivity. The life of the Buddha after his awakening is perhaps the clearest example. He did not withdraw into silence. He walked across India for 45 years. He taught, he faced opposition. He dealt with illness in his own aging body. He watched close disciples die, and through all of it he continued, present, responsive, engaged. That is not surrender. That is what it looks like when clarity and compassion move together. There is also a subtler trap, one that catches even sincere practitioners. The trap of turning acceptance into an identity. We encounter the teachings, we practice, we begin to feel calmer, steadier, and then one day we say to ourselves, I have let go, I am past this. We mistake a period of calm for the end of the journey, and then life tests us. We open a drawer and find a photograph of someone we once loved. We hear a song tied to someone who is no longer here. And everything rushes back. Suddenly, we are not the person who has let go. We are just someone who is hurting. And often, the real weight is not the emotion itself. It is the shame that follows. We think, what is wrong with me? I thought I was past this. But that shame is misplaced. The ache that comes when we see that photograph, that is not weakness. It is proof that we loved someone genuinely. It is our humanity, not our failure. The problem was never the feeling. It was the story we built around, having let go, and then the disappointment when life showed us that story was premature. This happens to almost everyone who sincerely practices. It does not mean the practice has failed. It means we are still in the middle of it, which is exactly where we are supposed to be. True acceptance does not announce itself. It is more like sleep. We cannot say, I am sleeping and still be asleep. The moment we need to tell ourselves, I have accepted this, there is usually something still unresolved. The path is long. It does not ask us to be finished. It only asks us to keep walking. So what is acceptance in its simplest form? It is being here with this right now. Pain arises, we know it is there, and we do not build a world around it. Joy arises, we feel it, and we do not grasp at it. Something is lost, we acknowledge it, and we do not demand it back. It sounds almost too simple, but anyone who has tried it knows. Being present with what is, without adding or subtracting, is one of the hardest things a human being can do. And also one of the most freeing. If you have been listening closely, a question may have quietly formed. I understand this. I even agree with it. So why is it so hard to actually live? This may be the most honest question anyone on this path can ask. In the early teachings, there are three levels of understanding. The first is wisdom from hearing, from reading, from listening. We encounter the teaching and we nod. Yes, everything changes. The second is wisdom from reflection. We think it through and we see the logic. Yes, nothing lasts. But neither of these changes how we actually live. Not really. Because when the moment of real loss arrives, when someone we love is gone, when the ground shifts beneath us, all the understanding in our heads cannot stop the wave from hitting. This is why so many of us feel frustrated. We know the teaching, we believe it, and yet we still suffer, and we wonder if something is wrong with us. Nothing is wrong. We have simply not yet crossed the bridge from knowing to seeing. Knowing is information. Seeing is transformation. They are separated by direct experience. The third level of understanding is wisdom born from living it, from meeting life as it is, again and again, until the mind begins to recognize, not as an idea, but as something felt in the bones. The breath comes and goes. Sensations arise and dissolve. Thoughts appear, and then they disappear. Not because we've read that they do, but because we have watched it happen in real time in our own experience. And in that watching, something shifts. We do not just know that everything is impermanent. We see it, not as a thought, but as something the whole being recognizes. And once we have seen it that clearly, we cannot unsee it. When that kind of understanding settles in, acceptance is no longer an effort. The hand simply opens, because we have seen directly that what we were holding was never solid to begin with. But this does not happen once and then it is done. Acceptance is not a decision we make one morning and carry with us forever. It is something that lives in every moment, every time plans fall apart, every time the body aches, every time someone leaves. We stand at the same crossroads, resist or see clearly. Most of us will resist first. We will react with anger, with sadness, with regret. That is what it means to be alive. The teaching does not ask us to stop being human. The instruction is simpler than that. After the reaction, look again. That moment of looking, when we notice the sadness instead of drowning in it, that is the practice. That is acceptance at work, not as a distant ideal, but as something that happens in an ordinary moment, on an ordinary day. There is a contemplation preserved in the early texts that cuts through something most of us prefer to leave unexamined. It is the contemplation of death. We spend most of our lives carefully avoiding that thought. We arrange our days as if time is unlimited, as if the people we love will always be there, as if tomorrow is certain, but the teaching suggests something different. Not as a way to create fear, but because most of what keeps us stuck is the quiet assumption that we have more time than we do. A passage in the A Letter 1E45 Gutt a Nikaya describes someone who thinks, "I might die within a day," and considers even that awareness to be careless. True contemplation, it suggests, means understanding that life can end in the space of a single breath. If we genuinely lived with that awareness, would we still hold that grudge? Would we still wait to say what actually matters? Thinking about death in this sense is not about becoming morbid. It is about waking up to the life we already have before it becomes the life we had. It does not make life heavier, it makes life real. And when life becomes real, when we see that everything is genuinely finite, something loosens. The grip softens, and in that softening there is space. Space that begins to feel something like freedom. When people hear the word liberation in these teachings, many imagine something otherworldly. A monk on a mountain, detached from feeling, floating above the ordinary mess of life. When we are in pain, the idea of escaping from all of it sounds like the only kind of freedom worth having. But that is not what the teaching points toward. The freedom described here is not freedom from life. It is freedom within life. Right here in the middle of the noise, the loss, the beauty, the heartbreak, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty. It is the moment the mind stops being pulled around by its own reactions. This is called upekkha, equanimity, one of the four Brahmaviharas, the sublime states. Most people hear equanimity and think it means detachment. It does not. It is the steadiness of a mind that has weathered enough storms to know the storm is not the sky. A person with equanimity still feels, still knows pain, still knows tenderness, still knows loss, but the mind is no longer dragged around by these experiences. It meets whatever comes. The way we might sit with someone who is grieving, not trying to fix anything, not pulling away, just being there. True happiness from this perspective is not about feeling good all the time. It is something quieter. When something beautiful happens, we receive it without clinging. When something painful happens, we feel it without breaking, not because we are numb, but because we have found ground that does not shift with every change in weather. This is where acceptance and freedom meet. We cannot be free while we are at war with reality. Every act of resistance binds us tighter to the very thing we are resisting. The more we push against what is, the more defined we become by it. But when we look directly at life, all of it, what we wanted and what we didn't, and we say, I see this. I am here. I am not running. Something that has been tight for a long time begins to let go. There is a simple image that appears across contemplative traditions. The sky and the clouds. The sky never pushes the clouds away. It never holds them in place either. Clouds come, the sky has clouds. Clouds pass, the sky is clear. But the sky is always the sky. It has never been harmed by any storm. It remains vast, open, because its nature is larger than anything that passes through it. Our awareness is that sky. Our emotions, our memories, our losses, our joys, they are weather. Some days the clouds are thick and heavy. Some days the sky stretches open and still. But the sky does not become the clouds. It was never the clouds. Remembering this, not as an idea, but as something recognized in the deepest part of the experience, this is what acceptance finally means. Accepting life as it is does not mean we stop feeling. It does not mean we walk through the world untouched. It means we do all the things a human being does: grieve, love, build, let go, without demanding that life be other than what it is. We grieve without arguing with death. We love without requiring permanence. We build without insisting on certainty. We live with our feet on the ground and our eyes open, and that, in the end, is freedom. Not the freedom of escaping to some other place, but the freedom of being wholly here, in this breath, in this moment, whatever it holds. The teaching left behind three observations. Three simple statements that, if truly seen, not just heard, but seen, open something in the way we move through life. All conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are inherently unsatisfying. All phenomena are without a fixed self. These are not conclusions. They are doors. When we stop resisting impermanence, we are freed from the fear of change. When we stop expecting conditioned things to fully satisfy us, we are freed from the endless chase. And when we see that there is no fixed, separate self that needs to be defended against life, we are freed to live it completely. That is the path described here, not a path away from life. A path through the center of it, with open hands, with steady eyes, with the quiet recognition, finally, that we do not need life to be different in order to be at peace. In seeing, only seeing. In hearing, only hearing. The moment is already here. It has always been here, waiting not for us to accept it, just for us to stop arguing with it.